Hey everybody, welcome back to Readers That Write. Today we're wrapping up one of my favorite segments we've done so far. It's how to write a hacker. So today we're going to be covering all of the other types. We've covered white hats and black hats so far. So stay tuned after the jump and we'll dive into it. Hey everybody, welcome back from Jump. We have a lot to cover today and not a lot of time to do it. So we're going to be pretty brief and go into a little bit of detail on the last four groups of hackers. They are all less common than the first two that we've covered in individual episodes, the white hats and the black hats. But they're a little bit more of an offshoot of the two and can lead to some very interesting character arcs. And after we talk about the four groups, I'll give you an example of a character idea you can run with for each of those four groups. And as always, if you use any of these ideas, please let me know. I would love to read them. I always look forward to a good hacker in a story, and I don't see them very often. So let's dive into it. So as you guys know, the last couple of weeks we covered white hats and black hats. White hats are the good guys, black hats are the bad guys in general terms. These two groups are the largest and most common groups in the hacker industry and in the cybersecurity industry, but there are four other groups that fit somewhere in the middle. The white hats and the black hats tend to be a pretty extreme version of both. The white hats are your knights in shining armor or your cops hunting down the bad guys, trying to stop them and protect people, while the black hats are straight up malicious. They have malicious intent in everything they do. They're there to steal, rob, destroy, and do what they need to do to accomplish their missions. Their missions tend to be very... cold and analytical is not the best way to put it, but a lot of times they work for corporations to attack another corporation. They work for a foreign government to attack another foreign government. And that is what black hats do. Now, there are other groups of hackers, and a few of them have made the news over the last several years, so you may be familiar with some of them. Two of these groups are pretty common. The other two aren't as much, but if you want more description, more information, I will link an article by Tech Target. Holy cow. I apologize. That was a tongue twister for some reason. I'll link the article from Tech Target that goes into a little bit more detail and gives some examples and has some other resources for you. So that if you would like to learn more about these, you can. So the first one is a group that is pretty common in the industry. It's called gray hats. Gray hats sit somewhere in the middle. They tend to not be malicious. They are actively trying to find issues and bugs in software or in networks, and then they'll turn around and sell that information back to the company. They don't hold people hostage, and they don't destroy things, typically. Gray hats are technically illegal, but they do such good, important work for the industry that 99% of the time, white hats don't care and actually encourage it. Because they cross lines that white hats can't to find problems that white hats may not be able to see. So gray hats, like I said, while technically not legal and can cause problems, aren't frowned upon and aren't heavily pursued by the law. Typically, the only time a gray hat will actually be charged with anything is if they A, go too far, or B, they get caught before they can actually prove that they're a gray hat. We see this a lot. Companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google are heavily involved with gray hat organizations, going so far as to actually sign contracts with them to allow them open rights to test their products. Like I said, super common in the industry, especially the tech world, and is actually encouraged up to this point. It's something that white hats actually like to encourage as well, because the more gray hats there are, the less black hats there are. Gray hats tend to follow a lot of the same black hat procedures, but their intent is just to make a living. using their skills, but they don't want to be the white hat. They're people who enjoy sneaking, and I guess sneaking is not the right word either there. They enjoy the difficulties and strategic nature and the challenge of being a black hat, but they don't want to actually hurt people or cross lines. So they're basically a black hat with morals. Love gray hats. They're spectacular. And it's a very, very lucrative industry if you're good at it, because a lot of companies will pay very well depending on what holes in their security you find. So that's gray hats. Like I said, super common, pretty simple idea, pretty basic standard for what they do. The next is almost a derogatory term inside the hacker world. It's called a green hat. Very similar to calling somebody a greenhorn. It means you're new. You don't know what you're doing. You're making stupid mistakes. Green hats can be any branch of the spectrum. They can be leaning gray hat. They can be leaning black hat. Typically, they lean black hat, but they're too new and unskilled to actually do anything. Like I said, it can be a slight derogatory term. Most of the time when you hear the term green hat, it's when a white hat catches someone who doesn't know what they're doing and is basically protecting themselves like a glowing neon sign in the middle of the night. And that's when people will be referred to as green hats. And this is a pretty standard thing in pretty much every industry. There's always a term for the new guy. And in the case of cybersecurity, that's a green hat. Sometimes green hats do work on the white hat side, but typically it's the black hat side that we see that term used most often. Okay. Now, the next two. The next two are branches of black hats. They are malicious, they attack, and they intend to cause harm. These two groups have specific motives that are not the typical black hat motives. The typical black hat motives tend to be something money or mission related, whereas the blue hats and the red hats are not. First is the blue hats. Blue hats have vengeance in mind. They're your typical large corporation did something to someone that they care about, and all they want is vengeance. So they go to take down that corporation using every legal means necessary. That is a blue hat. Blue hats are incredibly dangerous because they don't walk away. Most black hats do. They have lines. They're typically more cold, and black hats are more cold and logical. They can walk away from a mission when it gets too dangerous most of the time. And they tend to be more ego driven than anything else. Although financially driven is also a big part of it. Blue hats have one goal in mind and one goal, period. It's a typical motive you see a lot in movies. One of my favorite books as well, The Count of Monte Cristo, he is vengeance driven. So if you take that character, stick it in the cybersecurity world, all of a sudden you have a blue hat. Blue hats are technically never the good guy, ever. They cause a lot of harm and a lot of damage in their wake, and often result in even people losing their lives because of some of the stuff they do. It is incredibly dangerous to even try and deal with a blue hat. And typically, if someone in cybersecurity finds one, that is the time you will immediately call someone like the FBI, because blue hats are so dangerous. And even trying to mess with them or get in the way of their mission will get you, or you will become a target as well of their vengeance and their wrath. So that's a blue hat. I know I'm moving pretty fast. We're going to keep this episode a lot shorter than the other ones. I want to spend more time on the characters so that we can get some ideas there. But this will probably be about half the length of the last two episodes. So back to our normal length. Okay. The last group is a group that most people will be familiar with in some way or another. Um, Oftentimes, this can get blurred as a branch of, or as part of black hats, but they are very different. As I said, black hats tend to be very cold and logical and business oriented, where they're doing something for a mission and for their ego, not for anything else. So red hats are what are called vigilante hackers. Vigilante hackers are hackers with a cause. You see this a lot with some of the large hacking organizations that have a cause or causes, like, and it can be brought as injustice, which is the hacking group Anonymous is famous for. They're the ones who are seen in the news most commonly because they're probably the largest in existence that we're aware of currently. But they strive to fight injustice. So anytime there's some form of injustice, they will actively become involved and target the organization causing that injustice, whether that be a government or a company or a single person. Other times you will find red hat groups that are targeting specific issues, whether it be a company that's contaminating lake water and causing cancer, or, and yes, I'm pulling all of these from actual examples, but I don't want to dive into names. The only one that I'm okay with saying is Anonymous because it's pretty common in the entire industry and everyone knows it. Plus, I'm not talking bad about them. I'm just saying they have a cause. Next, you may also see large insurance companies that deny hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of claims for people who suffered a hurricane. That may inspire a hacker to become involved and break their way in and release that money. This is the type of stuff that red hats do. They can be zealots in the way they do things, but they typically aren't. Typically, they are more ethical than the blue hats or most black hats. Typically. They will still violate hundreds of laws in their process, but most of the time they try and avoid detriment to human life. Most of the time. Some red hats have gotten involved in warfare. We've seen that most recently at the start of the Ukraine conflict. A lot of red hat hacker groups got involved to fight Russia and actually collapsed several major infrastructure items there in Russia, including power systems in the winter, that did cost lives. But more often than not, red hats don't typically lead to dead people, unless absolutely necessary. And that, like I said, that is not the case with blue hats and black hats. So if we were to put them on a spectrum with white hats and black hats at the either end, I would typically classify it as white hat, gray hat, green hat. I put green hats in the middle because, frankly, they're just not dangerous most of the time. They're too new to actually understand what they're doing wrong, and will get caught pretty easily most of the time. And then I would put red hats after that. I would put black hats and then blue hats. Black hats have lines. Blue hats typically do not. Now, that being said, if I'm taking this from a writer's perspective, you can write a protagonist in any single one of these categories. As long as you can frame it correctly, so what they are fighting against is the bad guy, unless you're wanting a morally gray character. If you want a morally gray character, a black hat hacker is spectacular at that. They typically have very little morals, very little concern for humanity as a whole. They're there to get their money and to leave. They don't care. And we see this a lot in movies with characters like smugglers. And in a lot of ways, that is typically how a black hat hacker acts. So think how Han Solo tries to act. He's not a great example because he has more morals than he plays to, but how he pretends to act in the beginning of episode 4 for Star Wars. Or if you've ever watched the Clone Wars series, there's a character called Hondo Ohnaka. Also a great example for how a black hat would act. A lot of times, black hats aren't your typical characters. So people always like to portray them as the nerdy programmer who sits in his mom's basement. That is not typically the case for black hats. Black hats tend to be businessmen and women. They are very good at selling themselves. They do tend to have a very narcissistic and cold view of life. So they are not super personable unless they want to be. They can put on a great face and a great con a lot of times. So that is your typical black hat. That very kind of cold, very almost dangerous appearing. But you don't know why, because they're not the 6 foot tall, well, not always the 6 foot tall chiseled abs person. Guy who can walk in and swoon every woman in the room. They're not a James Bond. Most of the time. There are some that are. So if you want to make that character a character, great. And yes, I backtracked a little bit and talked about something that we'd already talked about, but I wanted to talk about that so that we could pivot to the red hats and the blue hats. Oftentimes, a blue hat was a black hat or a white hat. It's about a 50-50 shot. And something happened to them that broke them. They tend to be a very mentally broken, kind of unstable person that wants nothing more than vengeance. They are happy dying after the mission is over. That is what they want. That is their end goal. And that is the only way that they can feel alive, is to seek and destroy. They make great antagonists. I have a hard time making them a protagonist unless you're going full grimdark. So if Joe Abercrombie wants to write a character like this, he could probably pull it off. But most of the time, that vengeance-seeking hacker doesn't have anything that's very relatable about them. And they kind of fall into that category of almost... no, I'm not going to make that equation. Or I'm not going to make that analogy. That's one that's going to get me in trouble. But yeah, so they're incredibly dangerous, incredibly unstable, and they have a single vengeful goal in mind with only that intent. So, like I said, great antagonist, maybe a decent grimdark protagonist. You would have to create a good arc for that to pull them out of that state and find a way to make it work. I actually just got talked into watching an anime called Attack on Titan. The character arc for that main character is about the only way you can make it work and that you can follow it to get that vengeance-driven character to have an actual hero's arc. Also, definitely recommend it. It has nothing to do with hackers, but the character arc in that is one that you can apply to a blue hat and make it work. It would be hard, and it would require a lot of written gymnastics. So, have fun with it. Okay, next, red hats. Red hats or vigilante hackers are super common in stories. One of my personal favorites is in the Arrowverse TV show. Felicity Smoke, when they first encounter her, is a vigilante hacker. She does have a day job as a white hat as well. Well, kind of. She works at a store, or no, she works in IT in general. But she does fall into both camps. That is not uncommon, unfortunately. Some white hats will moonlight as gray hats and red hats. That is kind of the way the world works. especially if white hats work for companies that they aren't too keen on the company's morals, but it's a paycheck. That is a time that is pretty common for a white hat to moonlight as a red hat or as a gray hat. A lot of times when a white hat's moonlighting as a gray hat is because they're not getting paid super well. And moonlighting as a gray hat, a lot of paydays for gray hats can be in the 6-figure range. Some have been higher into the 7 and 8-figure range, depending on what they can find and how they get in and what companies they're working with. So you could do that. You could have a Batman-esque character that has 2 different faces, one that works in IT or at McDonald's or wherever during the day, and they're a normal person, but when they go home, they're a vigilante hacker who's targeting an organization. That could be an excellent protagonist. That being said, a vigilante hacker can also make a very good antagonist. Not all red hats have moral lines. They can go too far. And honestly, a lot of superhero stuff you see can be this way. Another good example of this is V for Vendetta. Vendetta is technically a red hat hacker. He's actually what inspired a lot of the backbone of the hacking group Anonymous, and is a very good example of what a red hat hacker is that doesn't have a line. Red hats, when they don't have a moral line, are incredibly dangerous. They fall into that same camp as a blue hat. They do not care what gets in their way to stop what they see as bad. So you can go either way, antagonist or protagonist for that. If you go protagonist, make sure you make what they're fighting against bad. So they could be a red hat hacker that fights organized crime, human trafficking. All of those are very common for red hats to fight against, so it wouldn't be a stretch at all. There are a lot of red hats in the world that actively work with organizations and actually even will work with groups like the FBI and the CIA against groups like organized crime, like I said, or any of trafficking or any of the really bad things in the world. They will work against them. Like I said, that's something Anonymous is famous for. They don't always follow the law. They aren't something that I would actively pursue working with, but they do fight for a cause, and most of the time it's not a bad cause to fight for. Once again, they cross a lot of lines, though, that a white hat is not okay with. But that is all super, super common in the world, unfortunately. So those are some basic character ideas. I know I rambled there a little bit at the end, but that gives you an idea. Oh, I guess I didn't do green hats today. Character idea for a green hat's pretty simple. The low-hanging fruit on that is a student, a teenager in school who is screwing around. Honestly, this is where a lot of black hats and gray hats get started, is in that middle school to junior high age. They start screwing around with computers and find out they're good at it. And then they start searching the internet for things they can do. Stories of kids hacking systems to change their grades or change their attendance or excuse themselves from class, even though they weren't authorized to do that, are super common in both the white hat and black hat world. A lot of white hats are that way too. I guess one thing I didn't talk about with white hats either, there is a whole slew of white hats that are reformed black hats. Whether they got caught or they crossed the line and struggled with it and turned themselves in, it is very common in the cybersecurity industry to find reformed black hats who have served their jail time and are wanting to be better in society. They're often brought into companies who have programs for parolees where an officer will work with the company to monitor what they're doing, and help them turn their skills for good. There's actually several companies in the U.S. that is all they do. They do things like pen testing and things like that. And the people who work for them are reformed black hats. It is a spectacular thing. White hats are usually massive fans of this because turning enemies to allies is never a bad thing. You do have to watch them for a while until you can trust them. There are a few times that these reformed black hats go rogue, but this is something I actually saw in CSI Cyber. They talk about this a few times. There's a few reformed black hats on that show. They handled that very, very well. Some other things on that show were iffy on how they did things. They would embrace the slapping the keyboard technique far more than they should have, but that show actually had a decent representation of the cybersecurity world for how they tried. So I do have to give them credit. They're probably one of the best to pull that off, along with most of the NCIS world. But yeah, so there's some examples of what we're talking about. Let me know in the comments if you want me to go into more detail on stuff. I'm happy to do more deep dives. Next week, I'm thinking about pivoting to some fun stories where we talk about alternative bases for fantasy. Like most of you guys know, most of fantasy is based in the Western European style. So I want to talk, and I've been reading a lot of alternatives lately that are based on Asian or African or Indian fantasy worlds, and they are spectacular. And I'm hoping to employ some of that more into, even in some of the lesser known Western European cultures. It's been a lot of fun to read those. So next week, I'm thinking I want to deep dive that, or that may be 2 weeks from now, depending on what I decide I want to do. If I want to do one more of these, where we talk about some character ideas and character examples. So I'll put some thought into that. And either way, I will see you guys next week. And yeah, let me know in the comments which one you guys would like to see more. Have a good week.